I'm Grace Song, and I'm the Executive Director of the Usuli Institute. And I'll just take a moment, since people are new, to talk about what we do here. We are a nonprofit educational institute, and we launched at the end of 2017. And what we try to do is elevate knowledge in the Islamic tradition and critical thinking. We kind of pride ourselves on being very truthful and asking difficult questions and kind of tackling controversial topics that a lot of times other organizations will not tackle, because we really believe that, you know, in our faith there is, one, there's no embarrassment, and that nothing is off limits, and that it's important that we be truthful and moral and ethical in the way we live our lives, and that, you know, that means asking really difficult questions at times, and taking on things that other people are not, you know, willing to take on for whatever reason. So, you know, we're kind of out there and saying a lot of very interesting things, and hopefully starting to plot a little bit, but, you know, hopefully getting some conversations going. And so when we are called the Usuli Institute, and people often ask, well, what is Usuli? What does that really mean? And it's sort of a methodology, and it's an approach based on beauty and reason, and, you know, the idea that we, you know, go back into the Islamic tradition and we look at what are the moral and ethical principles that are timeless. And we apply those principles to our modern day problems. So we don't really believe that God intended to kind of hold everyone hostage in the 7th century when, you know, Islam was revealed, and that we're trying to reclaim some, you know, medieval way, but that Islam is very much, you know, alive, you know, living tradition, and Islamic law in particular, and that, you know, it has to be meaningful for our lives and hopefully help us to, you know, be the best versions of ourselves. So, you know, we try to, you know, tackle things that and challenge the status quo. So that's kind of what we do in a nutshell. And everything that we've done is available online. So if you go back and are interested in, you know, our educational events, our Tafsir, and all of that, everything is on usuli.org. So, and for me, for those of you who don't know me, I always am sort of proud to say that, you know, the voice that I bring, I mean, the professor is, you know, obviously a very esteemed scholar, and but the voice that I bring is that of a woman, an American convert, and, you know, someone who chose this faith. And I'm always proud to say that I became Muslim before I actually even knew the professor. So it's, you know, a lot of times people think that you convert because of marriage, but I'm always very proud to say, no, I actually, you know, took the time to study this religion. You know, I did my own journey, my own search, and, you know, I'm very proud and very blessed, I feel, to be Muslim. And I was saying, you know, that's like the #1 gift that God gave me. And the #2 gift that God gave me was being married to an incredible scholar. So I was able to really understand, you know, Islam in a way that most people don't have the opportunity to see. And so now I feel like my way of giving back and paying back that debt to God is to share what I've seen. And so I try to take this time in the beginning to kind of tell stories, ideas, you know, share some anecdotes, and hopefully kind of just give a different perspective. Because sometimes, you know, people see things in different ways, and I, you know, as a partner in kind of all things personal and professional to the professor, I have kind of my own, you know, vantage point. And I'm not a scholar. I sort of consider myself like an educated lay person, so it kind of has to make sense through my lens. So that's kind of the background. So since we last got together a month ago, we actually had the great fortune of going back to the East Coast, where we met. We met in Princeton, New Jersey, about 24 years ago. So we actually celebrated our 24-year wedding anniversary during the week that we were back. So it was like the UCLA spring break, and we were back in Princeton, and it was kind of cool because we got to see Professor Madarsi, who is a mentor, and he's a professor at Princeton, who the professor studied under. And he was my wali when we got married. And I had no clue what a wali was, but he was mine. And I was actually really grateful. It wasn't because I felt I needed to be represented, but just the blessing of having, you know, this Ayatollah, actually, which is interesting, represent me. It was kind of him giving our you know, wedding and our marriage his blessing. And so it was really meaningful, and we got to go see him and have dinner with him and his family, which is like our favorite thing. And then we also went back to, this is kind of silly, I'm just sharing stories, but we went back to the apartment where we got married, and I brought a picture. So, and the reason why it's significant is that it's actually where the Conference of the Books was born. Okay. And because, you know, if you've read the book, Conference of the Books, it starts out and it says, in this little apartment outside of Princeton, New Jersey. Well, this was it. And so we went back, and we hadn't been back in a long time, and it was kind of funny because we were walking, and I'm very sentimental, so I'm taking pictures, and, and of course the people inside our apartment were like looking, who are these people that are creeping outside of our apartment? So, but anyway, in case you're interested, I'll just pass it around. And then of course, at that time, Sharif was about 4 or 5. So we used to like run around in the yard and play soccer. So it was kind of a nice trip down memory lane. But the thing that's really significant about it is, when we went back and kind of went to these familiar places, it really reminded me of kind of my early days as a Muslim and as a convert, because I was about a year in when I met the professor. So I had already converted and kind of spent my early conversion days entering like a mosque. Actually when I converted, I had never entered a mosque before. So once I converted, and I converted in Princeton too, so it was another reason why Princeton was significant. When I converted, I was like, okay, it's time to go meet my people. And so I went to the mosque for the first time and didn't really have any idea what to expect. And of course now I know that, it's not always the most welcoming and warm place for converts in particular. And, I wanted to talk, in previous halakas I've talked about kind of the journey, like from zero to becoming Muslim. So, if you're interested in kind of those stories, you can go back and find my other halakas. And I've talked about how kind of this whole journey happens in stages. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what happens when you cross the finish line. You go, okay, I've decided I'm going to be Muslim, and I don't really know what I'm getting myself into, but I have fallen in love enough with this faith that I want to make that commitment. And, of course, I think that, and I've said many times before, that for people to convert today is really quite miraculous, considering how difficult it is to be Muslim and how much baggage there is. Like if you tell somebody, anyone who loves you, that, I'm thinking about being a Muslim, they kind of look at you and wonder what's gone wrong and why, why are you crazy, and, why are you ready to subject yourself to something horrible. But, in that journey, it's kind of a quiet, reflective journey, and you spend a lot of time, in discovery and kind of falling in love, and you're sort of looking for, something beautiful. I think that the whole purpose of these kinds of journeys and searches is that you are looking for how to feel comfortable in your own skin. And I know that was definitely the case for me. Like, I just felt like, I didn't know what my purpose was in life. I didn't feel comfortable with who I was. I didn't have a particular principle by which I lived. I could be in, the same circumstance 5 different times and react in 5 different ways, just completely dependent on my emotion, my whim, not necessarily to, a moral principle or anything like that. And I reached a point, when I was in graduate school where I really just wanted to understand, okay, what is my purpose and what is my place? And so I started searching for kind of like what I've referred to in the past as a divine ideal. Like, what should life be, and what should my role be in that? So you kind of go into this reflective mode, and you read, and you talk to God, and all of these kinds of things. And you finally come to the decision, through whatever, at least for me, that Islam kind of embodied all of the really beautiful virtues and principles and ideas that that meant something to me and that I fell in love with. So, not knowing many Muslims, I said, okay, I'll do it. I'm going to be Muslim. And so I crossed the finish line in Princeton, started going to the mosque, and immediately I became sort of confronted with what I call like checklist mentality. So, Muslims that I met, one, there were not many converts, and they didn't quite really know what to do with me as a convert. But people were well-intentioned, and they started telling me, well, you need to do this if you want to be a good Muslim. You need to wear hijab. You need to, pray in a straight line. You need to make sure that your skirt covers your legs all the way. You need to make sure your hair is not, it's like all of the things that you go check, 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 check. Or Islamic law. Islamic law says that you have to wear hijab. Islamic law says that you have to blah, blah, blah. So I kind of was coming from, like a falling in love period of like, gosh, beautiful ideas, justice, mercy, compassion, a loving God, to kind of like seeing what it looked like on the ground, which was very much like let's check this off, and if you follow this particular law, then that will make you a good Muslim. And not knowing very much, I kind of just took it in and said, okay, well, that's fine. And kind of suspended judgment and just waited to see what happened. And thankfully, I met the professor like about 10 months after that. Before I was kind of like, okay, I'm done. I'm sick of checklists. I'm out of here, like I think a lot of converts do. And the thing that's really important is that, you know, if you are in that mentality, the only thing that was really going to be an antidote and that's going to save you is knowledge. And so I remember, you know, being back in Princeton and feeling like the very first time that I walked into this apartment, and as I've said before, it's kind of like if you imagine this space full of books. I mean, actually, you know, this living room here has like a whole bunch of books, but if you imagine all of this is like crammed into a one-bedroom apartment, that's what that little apartment was like. So here I was, new convert, you know, walked into the apartment, and it's like, oh my God, look at these books. What is this? You know, it was just like eye-opening. And, you know, I was just like, oh, okay. Again, not really sure what to make of it, how to place it. It was really foreign and all of that, but just kind of got the sense of this weight of knowledge and beauty. And it was, you know, quite the juxtaposition to kind of when you go to the mosque, and oftentimes you go to a mosque and there are no books around, which is very interesting. And there's not a whole lot of reference to knowledge. And I realized that part of my liberation from that checklist mentality is coming across certain things that were like aha moments that unlocked freedoms for me. So one of the things that unlocked for me was seeing all of these books and talking to the professor and recognizing that, you know, when we talk about different kinds of issues, and of course, like last, I think 2 halaqas ago, I talked about what I asked the professor about hijab and how he answered the question for me, like, do I have to wear hijab? And in a nutshell, he's like, let's go to the books and let's ask the books. And we would look it up, and basically in a huge volume, you know, it would be like one paragraph that says, it's better if you cover in prayer, you know, in Jumu'ah prayer. And we did that several times, and that's how, kind of what cemented in me, okay, you know, there's a completely different tradition happening here than what I'm hearing at the mosque. And I'm really intrigued, and I want to understand more. So as I got to know the professor, as we got married, as we started dealing with people, because people would often come and ask the professor for help, even just seeing how he would interact with his family and friends and whatever, I started seeing a very different ethic than the checklist mentality. It was like dealing with people with love and with complexity. You know, if someone had a problem, we'd start by going to the books. We'd start by going to the library and go, okay, let's see what the jurists in the past have had to say about this ethical issue or this moral issue or the things that, you know, we should be weighing. And you look at these books, these are not books of like, you know, what was decided in this particular case when someone had a property issue with his landlord. You know, they're not like the legal findings. These are books that discuss like moral questions, ethical questions. What are, you know, the rights of human beings? What are the rights of God? What is the right approach when we are confronted with certain challenges and questions? These are the moral principles by which, you know, you can apply to whatever complicated problem you're dealing with and try and seek the most beautiful way. And that's really what the professor's book, The Comments of the Books, is about, is that engagement with jurists, with the Islamic tradition, trying to find out what is the most beautiful way forward in any given situation. And, you know, we as human beings, we're very complex, so it's not as easy as a black and white. This is what's right and this is what's wrong. So that was very, very powerful for me, and that unlocked the freedom. And then I learned that there are multiple like decisions in any given case. You know, at the mosque I'm hearing, everything is black and white, it's easy, Islam is a very simple religion, you know, it's just about whatever it is. And then I would come back to my reality and be like, no, you know, it's amazing. It's like there are so many different ways that a person and a scholar can approach a problem. And, you know, the other issue that was also confusing for me as a Muslim is, okay, I grew up in America. I'm an American. I don't really know anything about American law. So, you know, the only time I really think about American law is, okay, well, maybe I get a parking ticket, maybe I get a speeding ticket, I have to go to court for that. Maybe I know somebody that's involved in a legal case, but, you know, other than that, I don't, you know, if I need something, I hire a lawyer. Because this is a technical field. I don't know anything about law. I'm not going to go represent myself if I'm in a case. And when I transpose that to Islamic law, you know, or to Muslims, it's very different because every single Muslim you meet is an expert in Islamic law. And you're taught very early on as a convert that you have to be very, you know, Islamic law minded. But the really funny thing is after 25 years of marriage and all the things that we do, you know, if I ask a Muslim, okay, can you tell me what Islamic law is? Can you tell me what Sharia is? Can you tell me what the difference is? Can you articulate it? No one can. For the vast majority of people really cannot. And there is no appreciation that law is a very technical field, you know, and that's in America, that's why we don't represent ourselves when we, you know, are in a court of law. But we don't appreciate that particular analogy when it comes to our religious tradition, and that's something that is really, really important. So, you know, going back to the idea of aha moments. So, you know, when we were in Princeton, the professor was giving a talk about Sharia in the university and talking about the whole idea of law. And that really stood out to me as like, okay, we have to understand, like if we take an analogy, let's say to American law, you know, my question is, okay, so what do I, now that I'm Muslim, is my loyalty now supposed to be to Islamic law over American law? And, you know, is there something different that I'm supposed to do? Like, how do I understand my relationship with, you know, Islamic law? I don't want to do something wrong. I don't want to anger God, you know, all of that. But let's take it to an American law analogy. We know, for example, in today's world, if you look at American law, it's okay to cage children, right? It's okay to separate families at the border. It's okay to kill people in other countries by drone strike without accountability. It's okay to arrest and, you know, whistleblowers that we don't like because they're, you know, like telling the truth in a way, you know. So these are like sort of draconian American laws. Is it fair for us to say that, oh, see, that's an American law, so it must mean that that's what Americans are? Of course not. You know, we don't think about it in that way. So in order to understand, like, okay, what's the relationship between, let's say, Islamic law and Islam? You know, Islamic law might be like a particular finding that might be really ugly and disgusting, like the Sultan of Brunei, right? Now it's saying that you can kill people for being, you know, gay, or we can chop off hands because they've, you know, stolen something. But does that ugly ruling implicate the beauty of Islam? If you're talking about a moral and ethical message from God, that, you know, God wants us to, you know, be sort of agents for justice and love and mercy and beauty. So these are some of the things that helped unlock for me, like, okay, well, what is my relationship with Islamic law and American law? I think that the reason why I bring this up is the professor talked, as I said, about Sharia and Islamic law, and I have a lot of these lectures that I've recorded and uploaded. But if you're interested in really like educating yourself about kind of that distinction about law and what does it mean technically as opposed to, you know, being like a normal person, I would encourage you to watch that. And that, as well as the other thing that he talked about in the last 2 weeks, combined with these discussions on law, is about love. And he was asked actually about a week and a half ago to give a talk to an interfaith group at the Islamic Center about love in the Islamic tradition. And it was a really surprising talk because he actually had never focused on the topic of love before in a lecture. And what I wanted to say is kind of when you're a scholar and you're asked to talk about a particular topic, that may be the only opportunity that you actually get to go back and kind of look at, you know, for example, the books and what you learned in the past and kind of work on, you know, what your presentation is about this particular topic. So in terms of like, sorry, what I wanted to say is to give you kind of an insight as to how scholars work. You know, they, when you're thinking about a topic like love, what he'll do is he'll go into this library and he will, you know, pull a lot of different kinds of books and a lot of traditions and a lot of scholars who have talked about love in the past. And it's a little bit like a symphony. You know, you're kind of like pulling, you know, different notes and, you know, you're reading and you're kind of like, you know, looking at how people approach different things and you're synthesizing that and you're kind of creating, you know, your own approach to something. And so what I wanted to say is not every scholar has kind of the same approach to, you know, the same given topic. And one of the things that I've learned as kind of like, you know, as a partner to a scholar is there isn't like a body of knowledge that every scholar taps into. So when we kind of, as Muslims, very casually say, well, scholars think this, or scholars think that, people tend to think that, oh, well, all scholars kind of have, like a similar understanding of something. It's kind of like if you're talking about medical doctors, and you're like, well, all medical doctors know that this thing happens to your heart. Well, that's actually not true. A scholar actually, I think a scholar is actually like an artist. So, it's a really important nuance to understand. Like, every scholar has their own individual approach to looking at the tradition, mastering the books, deciding which books to read, which scholars to listen to, which scholars to not listen to, and how to kind of bring it all together into a way that makes sense. And some of the people here were able to listen to what the professor had to say about love, and it was actually very, I think, very moving. But anyway, so the point is, I wanted to say that it's important for us to realize that not every scholar has the same approach. Okay. When we finished at Princeton, we came back, and he wanted to point out, what is the point of sort of all of this combination of like understanding love versus scholarship. It's that, okay, guys, I'm like choking. Sorry. I wanted to just say that, it's important for us as scholars as like educated layperson to just have an appreciation that there are, different scholars, different approaches, and that, they're not all the same. And just because a scholar tells you that, something is a particular way, it's within your right to challenge it and, to look for and trust, the beauty within you and, how different people approach different things. So just to give you kind of a sense of like appreciating that, when people say Islamic law is something and see Islam is really ugly, that it's not exactly, what it necessarily appears to be. So, the professor has emphasized that we should trust sort of our internal instincts about beauty and justice and love. And, in the absence, if you hear something that is really, like ugly, or something that kind of makes you feel like, this doesn't seem right to me, to listen to that inner voice and, to kind of suspend judgment and wait until you hear something that sits well with your heart and your mind. And so thank you very much, and that's it. Oh, sorry, so should we then break for prayer, or?
I don't know. You guys decide.
What time is it? How much time do we have?
It's 5 now? 6 till 7.
So,
Maghrib
why
isn't
don't
until
we
like
break
7.
and then?
Maghrib is until like 7:30.
Yeah, so the 6 still okay for us.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we still have time?
Yeah.
I think we still have time 1 hour before break if you want.
Oh,
because
okay.
6 still okay for us because Maghrib is 7 something.
Maghrib is
7:30.
7:30.
It's like 2 hours and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe we can start.
Okay, so the surah today, the chapter that we will talk about is Surah Bayyinah, which is number 98. And that for the regulars, I can't underscore or emphasize this point enough that when get into the habit of not listening to Tafsir, but to studying Tafsir and making each experience, which each surah, a transformative life experience. Like all text, regardless of how profound or eloquent or powerful a text is, a text's potential can only be realized and only brought to the fore through the agent who engages the text, the reader. And the experience of understanding the nuances of meaning that we go through when dealing with the Quran are completely a waste of time if you don't internalize these meanings into transformative experiences that completely reconstruct your character and completely transform. So I emphasize this repeatedly because in the age of mass communication and so on, it's very easy to get into the habit of becoming like information processors, for the intellect to simply process data and to lack, your brain becomes something that receives data and forgets data, and then acquires data and forgets data. Data and the intellect, unless they combine in like a chemical reaction with your soul and your spirit, then you miss the opportunity of the engagement of the Quran. And okay, so Surah Al-Bayyinah. This surah is fascinating because the 30th part of the Quran, which is that has most of the short chapters. The Quran was organized not by order of revelation, but more or less by the length of the chapters. And so the longest surahs, like Al-Baqarah and Al-Imran, was placed at the beginning, and the shortest surahs were all compiled at the end of the Quran. It is possible, not with great historical accuracy, but it is possible to reconstruct the organization of the Quran by order of revelation. But for a variety of reasons, that poses a lot of difficulties, and there are a lot of structural problems with that. The reason Surah Al-Bayyinah is unusual as part of the short surahs is because the short surahs, more or less, there is consensus that all the short surahs, which is the juz in the 30th part of the Quran, were more or less early revelations. But Surah Al-Bayyinah, chapter 98, is not among the early revelations. There is disagreement as to whether it was revealed in Medina or Mecca, but even those who say that it was revealed in Mecca agree that it was a late Meccan revelation. So even those who do say it is a Meccan revelation say that it is revealed sometime shortly before the Hijrah. The majority, however, say it was a Medinian revelation. So it was a revelation during the Medina period, during the life of the Prophet. The other aspect about it that makes it an unusual as a short surah is that its musical tonality, it's all the short surahs have a certain meter that is recognized, especially by Quranic reciters, and especially Quranic reciters from Egypt, Syria, Turkey, Indonesia, Malaysia, in other words, outside the Arabian area, that is, if you study the scales of music, you recognize the mizan or the meter of the verses. Surah Al-Bayyinah is of a different short meter, very different meter, musical meter for a short surah. And that is also one of the reasons that often when Quranic reciters recite the short surahs, they don't frequently recite Surah Al-Bayyinah because it takes them to a very different type of musical scale. The third reason that it is also an unusual chapter is that it addresses a historically contingent circumstance, especially it addresses Ahl al-Kitab or Jews and Christians. And as we will see in the opinion of many commentators, it addresses not just Jews and Christians in the absolute, but Jews and Christians of Arabia surrounding the Jews and Christians that existed around Medina, more specifically the Arab Jews and Christians at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And we'll come to all of this in a second. So normally when Jews and Christians of Arabia are addressed, they are addressed in the longer surahs, like Surah Al-Baqarah, not in the short surahs. And so Surah Al-Bayyinah was unusual also because of that. Now, I will add a fourth element that is normally not added or not addressed by commentators. And that is Surah Al-Bayyinah was, as we will see, it touches upon a variety of issues that have to do with moral and ethical responsibility and it opened up. It's as if it was a locus or a space for a variety of debates that were generated within the Islamic tradition. And you get a little taste of these debates if you read, for instance, Tafsir al-Razi or Tafsir al-Mataridi. They make general references to the broader intellectual debates that took place on the text of Surah Al-Bayyinah. Okay, so Amanda, can you just read the translation through for the entire surah?
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the Lord of mercy, the giver of mercy. Those who disbelieve among the people of the book and the idolaters were not about to change their ways until they were sent clear evidence. A messenger from God reading out purified scrolls containing true scriptures. Yet those who were given the scripture became divided only after they were sent such clear evidence. Though all they were ordered to do was worship God alone, sincerely devoting their religion to Him as people of true faith, keep up the prayer and pay the prescribed alms, for that is the true religion. Those who disbelieve among the people of the book and the idolaters will have the fire of hell there to remain. They are the worst of people. Those who believe and do good deeds are the best of people. Their reward with the Lord is everlasting, gardens graced with flowing streams, where they will stay forever. God is well pleased with them and they with him. All this is for those who stand in awe of their Lord.
Now, you will immediately notice when we talk about it how inadequate. This is which translation?
Abdul Halim.
I mean, translations, by their nature, are reductionist. They take the complexity of a text, and unless a translation is supported by copious footnotes that explain all types of nuances, the risk of a translation is reductionism. This even, the reading the Bible in Hebrew as opposed to its English translation is a completely a world of a difference. But reductionism is something that takes place in all intellectual milieus and all cultures, unfortunately. But it's anyway. So I'm gonna take and I have to admit with this surah I struggled quite a bit with what to cover and what to omit, because I mean, as you know from other surahs, if you cover everything, we can stay here hours upon hours, endless hours, sort of like what Grace was referring to. You have to make these tough decisions in which you are engaging the tradition and you are reconstructing the tradition and making these conscious decisions about. So, I mean, while I will give you a sense about everything that's touched upon, I will focus on, of course, what I think is the most pertinent and most important. So it starts out. So the first آية لم يكن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين منفكين حتى تأتيهم البينة. Now, literal meaning, لم يكن, the little thing to pause at here is لم يكن is present form. It's as if it is addressing. They call it a present. A present future form. So it's as if it's a continuing act in the present that will occur again in the future. So لم يكن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين منفكين حتى تأتيهم. Those who are kuffar, unbelievers, min أهل الكتاب, from the people of the book, and mushrikeen, who are the mushrikeen? Not hypocrites, but associate partners with God.
Polytheists.
Polytheists. So normally, the question always when the Quran mentions mushrikeen, is it talking about the theology of polytheism, or is it referring to specifically the Arab polytheists at the time of the Prophet? That's always the question when we see the word mushrikeen in the Quran. Okay, munfakin hatta ta'tihum al-bayyinah. They will not cease. Literally, that's what it says there. They will not stop. They will not cease. They will not change until the bayyinah comes to them. And the bayyinah we'll talk about what that is, but until something occurs, until there is some type of proof. So if you're reading this in a very literal way, you would say the unbelievers from the people of the book and the mushrikeen, the unbelievers at the time of the time of the Prophet, or the polytheists at the time of the Prophet, or the polytheists in general, will not stop until they receive proof. This, however, gave pause to generations of Quranic scholars. Part of the reason that this gave pause to them is that, and as we've talked about in the past, that our scholars used to take the Quran, their engagement with the Quran, it was far more nuanced and far richer than modern Muslims do. When it says لم يكن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين منفكين حتى تأتيهم البينة, if it's talking about the future, the present and the future, then we have a logical problem. Because if it is saying that people of the book, Christians and Jews, and polytheists are not going to cease or stop until they receive clear proof, then that implies that if Christians and Jews and polytheists in the future receive proof, they will transform in some form or another. But scholars for generations now said, well, but that doesn't make sense, because we know that plenty of proof has been presented to Christians and Jews and polytheists, and they doesn't necessarily change. That's not the way human beings function. And what does munfakin, what does that, infakka means to stop doing something or to change materially. So if it wants to say that they will become believers upon receiving proof, the Quran can say that. But that's not what it says. It says they will not stop. That's a vague reference. Stop what?
Yeah.
What is it that they're going to stop doing or not stop doing? And then, حَتَّى تَأْتِيَهُمُ الْبَيِّنَةُ, until the proof comes to them. Well, what proof? Is it talking about a supernatural event at some time in the future? Is it talking about the revelation itself? Is it talking about something innate and natal within us? So this gave pause to generations of scholars, and again, you summarize a great deal of scholarly debates, and I always feel like I'm cheating the tradition when I summarize, but that's the only way you can present a lesson. So, to make a long story short, studying the occasions for revelations, the various reports, reliable and unreliable, about Surah Bayyinah and when it was revealed, the circumstances for its revelation, the various reports about its revelation, the majority of scholars, and I think it's fair to say the vast majority of scholars, said that this is not the present form used, lam yakun, has to do with a technical grammatical point in Arabic where you can use the present form to refer to a past event. And this, by the way, the Quran often does in terms of the style of the Quran. When the Quran wants to emphasize a past event that has a continuing moral relevance. So in other words, it's telling you that there's something that happened in the past, but you can still obtain a continuing moral lesson from it. The Quran will often do that. It will use the present, future form to refer to an actual event that took place in history. Some of the more some scholars say, this has some of the more philosophically oriented scholars have said that the Quran often uses the present term to refer to the past, or the future term to refer to the present, because time is relative in the eyes of God, and space and time and meaningless. That takes us to Mullah Sadra's philosophy, and it gets to extremely high level of complexity that we don't need to jump into. Whether the past is actually past and the future is actually future and the present is actually present, and when you understand time from the divine eye instead of the human eye. And according to Mullah Sadr, Ibn Arabi, and others, the answer is no, but it takes us to another philosophical argument. So, لم يكن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين منفكين حتى تأتيهم البينة. So, then we get to the next step, that it is referring to something that the Quran addresses repeatedly elsewhere, and that is an ongoing dispute, and I'm unpacking the layers the same way that Muslim scholars used to unpack the layers, because again, as Reese was referring to, and it's interesting because we never coordinate what we're going to talk about, but somehow it always ends up driving. Because the methodology is critical, and it is, the reason I do these tafsirs is also so you get a sense for how serious scholarship takes place with a text as nuanced and as rich and as serious as the Quran. So the Quran refers to an ongoing issue, theological issue between the Islamic revelation, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and the Jews and Christians of Medina, the Arab Jews and Christians, and the polytheists, the Arab polytheists, who were closely allied to the Jews and Christians within the Hijaz area and Al-Ta'if and surrounding areas of Medina, in short. What is this continuing issue? The continuing issue is the question of the Messiah. And if you're interested in reading more about this in English, you can look at Muhammad Asad's translation of the Quran. Muhammad Asad, as a Jewish convert, he was also a scholar of comparative religions. So Muhammad Asad writes a long footnote about this, in which he, if you're interested in this entire debate, you can refer to it. That the Quran elsewhere, so for instance, when it constantly chides Jews and Christians by telling them that you know that you, in your own revelation, that there is an awaited Messiah, and that you've said, and when it says you said, it's referring to particular tribal leaders who were known in Arabia at the time to be awaiting the Messiah and looking for the signs of the Messiah. And you said that if this Messiah comes, and in fact, some of them were known to have complained that God had not sent a prophet to the Arabs, and that if God would send a prophet to the Arabs, that they will follow him. Now, there are, Ibn Taymiyyah in his famous book about Jesus quotes from the Old Testament and the New Testament, the various passages. I used to, one of my ex-students, Hisham Mahmoud, used to have this, he was fond of getting into all these debates about the text of the Torah and the text of the New Testament, and what it says about the awaited prophet. I'm not, although I've read the Torah in Hebrew, and I've of course read the New Testament in a variety of editions, but I'm not into this entire thing. But what I can tell you is that it is referring to a specific historical unfolding. Now, Quranic commentators notice something that modern Muslims often don't comment on. Why does it say الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين? Why does it say the people of the book first and then the polytheists second? And there is a response to that. It is because, again, the answer is in history. The polytheists that were allied to the specific Jewish and Christian tribes that we're talking about went to the elders of these tribes and said, in you, prophet, in Muhammad has appeared, a prophet, tell us, verify for us whether he fulfills the conditions of prophecy that you have in your revealed books. These tribes were known for, although they hadn't converted to Christianity or Judaism, but they had a well-known position from the time of the hijrah of the Prophet to Medina, that they were awaiting, they refused to convert to either Christianity or Judaism, awaiting the coming of the Messiah to join the new revealed religion that would be the fulfillment of the prophecies of Judaism and Christianity. And so they went to the elders of these tribes and asked them, does he fulfill these signs and conditions? And when the answer came, no, he doesn't, they then refused to convert to Islam. So what Surah Al-Bayyinah does is engages them by saying, you know that he does. You know that this is the awaited Messiah that was prophesied in your own text. And you know that you are not following him for reasons that have nothing to do with textual interpretation, but has everything to do with your own egos and politics of the time. And so it's interesting, though, that I've reviewed a number of translations in Surah Al-Bayyinah, and I find that none of the translations I looked at carry that important but critical nuance, because if you compare the approach of actually asking the obvious logical question, well, it doesn't make sense if it's referring to Jews and Christians and polytheists in the absolute. And the approach is completely shifted if you are talking about a historical unfolding. You'd think that that would be a very critical issue that all translations would include, but they don't. Okay, so now, munfakkina, they will not cease. So the people of the book and the polytheists, they will not cease, they will not stop. They will not, munfakkin can even mean change. So munfakkin here that word would mean what? They will not stop opposing the Prophet, or that they will not stop refusing to follow the truth, or they will not. So in other words, now we have an actual contingent circumstance, his context for understanding what they will not stop is referring to. Okay, so far so good? Everyone follow? Okay. Now, another issue that comes up at this point. A number of theologians, well, I'm say number, but it's actually most. But among the early theologians that noted this problem said, well, wait, we know elsewhere, like for instance Ibn Kathir, although the Tafsir Ibn Kathir is often the most succinct and also superficial, but he notes this towards the end of his commentary on Surah Al-Bayyinah, that we know from Islamic theology, and the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man yaf'al khayran falan yukfarah," that whoever does good will not be denied its benefits. In other words, if you do good, even if you're not Muslim, God is not going to ignore that. And this opening ayah would be problematic if it is taken to mean to condemn Jews and Christians and polytheists regardless of the good they do, because as we've talked about in the other surahs, that a principle within the Quranic text is an ihsanu bil ihsan, that goodness must be responded to with goodness. That is the part of the elements of Allah's justice, Allah's mercy. So here, by the first couple of centuries, it becomes pretty much standard to note, well, for the commentators to note that here it doesn't, and this is sometimes also absent in some of the translations, not all of them, that it says, الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنْ أَهْلِ الكِّتَابِ وَالْمُشْرِكِينَ. Min could mean, refer to all of the people of the book and the polytheists, or so all-inclusive, or could mean some of the people of the book and the polytheists. And it is quite interesting that, you know, if you look at Tafsir al-Maturidi, Tafsir al-Razi, Tafsir al-Tawhidi, Tafsir al-Kashani, that they go to considerable lengths to say, well, it is important to note that it's referring to of some of the people of the book, of the polytheists. So, historical contingency, you have to know which particular Arab groups that it was referring to, and we don't have time to go into who the elders were and who the tribes were, and there's a lot written about that. And then that the min here is not the all-inclusive min, it is the partial min, the min تفيد الجزئية وليست الكلية. Okay. So that's the opening salvo, and it's a very important theological opening salvo. Al-Razi reminds us of something that, I mean, it was interesting to find it in Razi because it's something that the Sufi commentators would often add to this their comments on the very first verse of the surah, and that is particularly the Sufi commentators would launch into a discussion that why they would elaborate upon why God. I said that when you use the present tense to refer to a past event, it's a continuing moral and ethical point. Excuse me. So what is the continuing moral and ethical point? The continuing moral and ethical point is that, as you note, that human beings are master deal breakers with the divine because of the weakness of their soul. So for instance, Al-Razi, and here, for how many of you know read Arabic or know Arabic? Just show. I want to see the hand so I know if whether to quote or not. Okay. I mean, I quote the Arabic and then I translate it, but the reason I like to quote the Arabic is that so at least those who know Arabic can get a sense of what the little taste of what the original discussions sounded like. So here is an example. فالإنسان يقول لست أمتنع مما أنا فيه من الأفعال القبيحة حتى يرزقني الله الغني فلما يرزقه الله الغني يزداد فسقا فيقول واعظه لما لم تكن منفكا عن الفسق حتى توسر. And then it goes on. So the point is that human beings will often say, well, I will do what I do, but only if Allah would give me. Only if Allah would give me the best, the job that I want, the house that I want, the spouse that I want. Only if Allah would allow me to find my dream partner, my soulmate. Only if Allah would. And at that moment, they supplicate, and they might even do dua more warmly than they ever did. And at that moment, they mean it. But it is the habit of human beings that once Allah gives them, their feelings change, and their doubts return, and their attitude returns, and so the Sufis in particular would say the issue here is not simply that these people had a deal with God. God send us a prophet that fulfills the signs, and we will follow that prophet. We will give up our positions of leadership, because if you read enough of the history, a lot of their prestige, especially in the area of Medina, not as opposed to Mecca, depended on their marketing that thing of the awaited Messiah among the Jewish, and there was a lot of trade advantages. They took exemptions from the civil war between the Aus and Khazraj. In other words, the Aus and Khazraj allowed them to not be involved in the civil war because they were supposed to be the scholars of the awaited Messiah. There's a lot. But after Muhammad appeared, all of that was forgotten. All the old ahlaf and all the old promises that as well as the polytheist groups, and in fact, most of them ended up joining in alliances with the Meccans against Muhammad and the Ansar and the Muhajirin, and so in other words, joined the war against the Prophet and his followers. And so the Sufis spend a great deal of time reflecting on this and addressing it at length, and say, the continuing moral ethic here is that human beings always tell God, if you would just send us a Bayyinah, if you would just send us something that would tell us you're with us. You're with us in terms of make me rich, give me a job, give me, in other words, God, if you're there, just give me some good to prove that you're there. God gives it to you, and the first thing you do is doubt that God gave it to you. That you didn't deserve it all along. Razi, who didn't self-identify as a Sufi, and Razi was far more of the rationalist school of thought, he was technically an Usuli in training and in theology and in a variety of things. But he does mention this and advises readers to consult particular tafsir like Tafsir al-Jilani or Tafsir ibn Arabi and so on, to understand why is it that God used the present future term for a past event. So in other words, God is telling you, yes, this happened in the past, but it happened, and it will always happen, and that is alerting human beings that you promise that this will be a point of departure in your life. I give it to you, and it doesn't become a point of departure in your life. You go all to your old habits or to your old doubts and so on. In the bag I brought along with me some of the Sufi tafsir, but then it would make this too long if I start going from it. Okay, we're still on the first verse, so
it's a very important verse. I've already several questions.
Okay, hold on, questions. No more questions until the end.
Yeah, of course.
Just write down, so you don't forget though. Okay. So, what time is it, Chief?
5:45.
I already broke all the promises I made to myself about keeping time. Okay, so حتى تأتيهم البينة. Okay, البينة. We have to pause at البينة because it's not me who pauses at البينة. It's the various scholars. The question is, okay, it says they will not stop, or they did not stop, or they promised that would change, but they did not change. What is the Bayyinah? Now, Bayyinah, it derives from the Arabic word Bayyinah. Bayyinah is to differentiate something from something, to distinguish something from something. Bayyinah in law means an evidentiary proof. So, Bayyinah qada'iyya or Bayyinah shar'iyya means a piece of evidence that helps you differentiate something from something, ignorance from knowledge and so on. But in this context, in this revelation, what is Bayyinah referring to? And I will go through the various scholarly opinions and then try to synthesize. So, some said Bayyinah here must be referring to revelation from Allah in general. For others said no, it must be referring to the Quranic revelation, that till the Quran was revealed because of the verses that follow. And you might agree with that when we talk about the verses that follow. Others said no, it's clearly what it means, what it's referring to here is the Prophet Muhammad himself, that the Bayyinah is the Prophet Muhammad who fulfills the conditions of the prophecy that they knew about, which, I mean, a very interesting field of scholarship is to trying to reconstruct what the Arab tribes believed that upcoming prophecies, whether the Christian, Jewish, because there were also disagreements among them about what the prophecies of the awaited Messiah are. Some scholars, modern scholars, they go back and they say, no, it's the same prophecies that you can still find in the Torah and in the Injil, that these same verses still exist. I'm more skeptical of that opinion, but anyway, that takes us to a different specialty in a different field. I'm skeptical doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that maybe because I don't know enough about it, I'm skeptical of it. I don't know. Skepticism often is just the product of ignorance and nothing else. Skepticism often is raised by people as a wise-ass position, a position of egotism and superiority. No, skepticism is often an admission of just you're ignorant, and so you should be honest about it. Now, a lot of Usulis and rationalists said no, al-Bayyinah, because of the subsequent verses in this chapter, which talks about the revelation more explicitly and specifically, al-Bayyinah does not refer to the Quranic revelation, and it doesn't refer to the Prophet, because shortly in the verses that follow it will refer to the Prophet specifically. So it's referring to something else. And here, if I can, Razi was, as I said, was an Usuli. So I'll just quote and then I'll explain what it says. If I can find it. Oh, sorry, it's not a Razi that I'm looking for. It's a Maturidi, the famous finder of the Ash'ari school.
You mean Maturidi
Yeah.
school?
Maturidi.
Yeah, you said
Oh, sorry,
yeah.
sorry. Is it on Maturidi, or not the Ash'ari, the Maturidi, which is the between Ash'ari and Mu'tazila. Maturidi's tafsir, I like it because he still carries a lot. I mean, his position is nearly identical to Usuli's in so many issues. So here's what he says. والبينة هي والبي where is it? Yeah. هي ما في خلقة كل أحد مما يدل على ألوهية الله ووحدانيته. So what he's saying is, as many of the Usuli said, that al-Bayyinah means your innate fitra, your innate intuitive knowledge of the innateness of the Islamic revelation, and particularly as it will, when it invokes the Hanafiya, which we'll talk about in a second. Remember that in Islamic theology, the tribalism of Jews is considered to be non-intuitive. And the Trinity of Christianity is considered to be non-intuitive. The Trinity was known to the ancient Egyptian theology, and it was known to the ancient and medieval Arabs as the theology that came from ancient Egypt. And it was also considered to be contrary to al-Wahdaniyya, to the monotheism and the intuitive monotheism of Ibrahim. Ibrahim, who is often the archetype of monotheism, was claimed by as the par excellence, or the epitome of monotheism in its pure and unadulterated form, which is confirmed by the Prophet Muhammad. So what Al-Razi is referring, what Maturidi is referring to, and what a lot of the Usulis are referring to here, is that the Bayyinah is that inner calling within you that tells you that Allah is one and only and unequaled, the supreme, the first, the end, the beginning, the all, etc., etc. So this will harken back to the theme of Hanifs, which the word that the surah uses in a second. Wait, so pause here, or
It's 5:50. You go till 6.
okay. So just keep in mind that what the innateness or the intuitive nature sense that we are talking about is often referred to in theological language as the Hanifiya or the Hanifs, who are supposed to be or reportedly the Arabs who followed the monotheism of Ibrahim, but refused to convert to Judaism or to convert to Christianity because they rejected the tribalism of Judaism and also rejected the concept of the Trinity as corruptions to the revealed monotheism of Ibrahim. Ibrahim and Abraham, of course. So one last thing about al-Bayyinah. There is a lot of the Ahl al-Hadith said al-Bayyinah, and Ahl al-Hadith and the linguists. The linguistic school of Quranic interpretation, for grammatical reasons, said that the Bayyinah cannot be the Quran or the Prophet or intuitive knowledge, but rather the Bayyinah in this context means moment of death. that when death comes, you will know that this is the point where the truth will come to you, and you will know for sure that the followers, the people of the book, and the polytheists will know that they were wrong all along, and that this was the true prophet. Okay. You might have sensed already that I tend to agree with the intuitive school on the word Bayyinah in this context, but, you know, as we say, I believe my opinion is correct, but I always, at the same time, accept the possibility that it's wrong, and Allahu Alam, you know, you're free to believe whatever you want. Okay. رسول من الله يتلو صحفا مطهرة. So, a prophet from God that recites suhuf is literally parchments. Now, of course, at that time, parchments, in a literal sense, were made from the skin of sheep or bones, or but there is wide agreement that that's not what it's referring to. It's referring to a consistent theme in Quranic revelation that refers to revelation, even though it was oral revelation. It's not referring to the actual writing of the revelation, but often the Quran referred to revelation as if it is a written book. Many commentators then say, well, this is because it's up in the heavens, written somewhere. That's a debate we don't need to get into. Lawh al-Mahfuz and all of that stuff. So, that a prophet from Allah that recites Suhuf Mutahhara, a purified revelation. We get now to let's pause with that expression. By the way, the issue here linguistically is with Rasulun min Allah yatlu suhran mutahhara. Is it referring back to al-Bayyinah, or is that you pause at al-Bayyinah and a new thought begins? Anyway, so the issue with Suhuf Mutahhara, or the issue that deserves a bit of comment, is purified. We can understand that this is a revelation, but purified in what sense? Is it purified in the sense that it is free from error, مطهرة من الافتعال والافتراء, as they would say, or that it is مطهرة in the sense of purified as in blessed and beautified? So it would be a metaphorical meaning, not a literal meaning. Is it mutahara in the sense of another metaphorical meaning in Arabic, that sometimes you use the word tuhr, or purified, to refer to something that is truthful. So meaning mutahara means sadiqa, which is truthful, or as many Usuli said, mutahhara means ala ma tujibuhu al-hikmah. That mutahhara, and this is an old theological concept, that whenever God would use mutahhara, God would be referring to a revelation that is consistent with innate human wisdom. For modern Muslims today, that concept is a bit odd to them because it's unfamiliar to them. But for pre-modern Muslims, that was an old part of Islamic theology, that the word tahara can either be used in a literal meaning to mean pure, clean, or mutahhara could mean whatever is consistent with innate old wisdom. If you want to get a little bit radical and a little bit, you want to shock your system a little bit, you get into some of the very interesting debate about whether it's Aristotelian wisdom or non-Aristotelian wisdom, because Muslim theologians would actually talk about that. They used to refer to Aristotle as a Mu'allim Kabir, and some would say it is Aristotelian wisdom, and of course many of the later Sufis came and said no, all of those who followed Aristotelian wisdom were completely wrong. Islam came with a rebellion against Aristotle. So I mean, I'm just giving you again, so you get a sense for how rich this tradition is. So 2 verses, still just from Surah Al-Bayyinah, 2 verses. Part of why I do this is that I try. It irks me. It really annoys the heck out of me when I go and I find Muslims, often engineers, computer scientists, medical doctors, who say, brothers and sisters, let me do tafsir. And then they start spewing off. They're shooting from their hip. They're pulling it out of their rear ends, basically. They have no clue what. This tradition is so rich, and our forefathers, our ancestors, weren't wasting time. They were producing nuances of meaning because they were enraptured with the search for the divine. And if you follow the path of shooting from the hip and pulling it from your rear end, you immediately strike that sense of moral and intellectual impoverishment, where you start feeling egotistically arrogant, like, this tradition has nothing for me because I'm so smart, I'm so much smarter than everything I ever heard in a mosque. If you come from where I come from, nothing bothers you more than what you hear in the mosque, because it is so nuanced, and the amount of intelligence that has been invested in this tradition. And you've heard me say this a million times, especially those of you who studied these for a long time, that the intellectual investiture in this text, the text of the Quran, rivals any tradition by miles. Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, Hindu, Buddhist, but not if you take modern Muslims, and especially Muslims of the West, because non-Muslims of the East are plagued by despotism, and every time there's someone intelligent among them, they end up being arrested, tortured, and made to disappear in prison. And Muslims of the West are plagued by ignorance and stupidity. And between these two catch-22, so the reason that I do this, I'm very blunt. He's cracking up.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's true though. Speaking the truth. Is that again? You can falling in love with this tradition is falling in love with the intellects that have for generations and for centuries been invested in this tradition. So, رسول من الله يتلو صحفا مطهرة. We, for our purposes, will say mutahhara just means something pure and valuable and truthful. Although I, again, tend towards the opinion that mutahhara means innately consistent with intellectual intuition. But that, that's my. But for our purposes, let's take the less the mutahara, meaning that purified, meaning beautiful. That's a good compromise. That it is that the Prophet ﷺ is reciting yatlu, and notice here, because we're going to do Surah Iqra soon, inshallah, that Muslims even noticed when the Quran says to the Prophet, Iqra, read, as opposed using tala, which means to recite. Because we know the Prophet didn't read. So recite here means he would receive and recite it. Suhuf refers to not necessarily the written inscription of the Quran, but to a non-changing and a non-varying and a closed revelation. So, in other words, it's revelation that is not subject to alteration or change. Okay. فيها كتب قيمة. That's verse 3. Now, interestingly, again, because Muslims would pause with the Quran, some, especially the grammaticians and the literalists, said, well, فيها كتب قيمة. This is a very problematic expression. In it are, how did he translate the third verse?
Containing true scriptures.
Okay, yeah. Pause, pretend to be your ancestors for a second, and pause with this and say, فيها كتب قيمة. فيها, containing or in it, kutub, books or scriptures, قيمة, valuable. What did he say? Rich?
Containing true scriptures.
No, قيمة is valuable or rich or important. Okay. Now, how could the revelation be containing valuable kutub, valuable books or scriptures? Isn't it all valuable? Could it be partially containing? Is part of the revelation not valuable and another part valuable? Do you see what I'm saying? Now, of course, if it's modern Muslims, I can't help myself. If it's modern Muslims, I would say, brother, don't say things like that. Don't even think thoughts like that. You know, astaghfirullah. But your ancestors did. Say, how could God say, فيها كتب قيمة? How could it be in it, containing? So does this mean that part of it, and what is the difference between suhuf and kutub? Why would it say suhuf, which means scriptures, and then kutub, which also means scriptures? And we know that the eloquence of the Quran would, of necessity, forbids it from using two words to mean precisely the same thing. The Quran never did that, because the Quran is way too precise for that. So that gave them pause. And launched a considerable discussion. So, I will skip the grammatical debate because it will take us about what is fiha necessarily partial or all-inclusive, juz'iyya am kulliyya, and this whole thing. However, what the major issue that this focused on is when it referred to kutub and fiha, is it referring to the revelation of the Quran or something else? And to make a long thing short, because I have to move on, that what it is referring to here is not simply it's not that in the revelation of the Quran, the Prophet is incorporating through the Quranic revelation التوراة والإنجيل والزبور. So I'll read to you just a little snippet again in Arabic, and then I'll translate it. يتلو كتبا عليهم وهي التوراة والإنجيل والزبور فهذا كأن هذا القرآن في تلك الكتب وتلك الكتب في هذا من عند القرآن. كقوله تعالى وإنه لفي زبر الأولين، أو إن هذا لفي الصحف الأولى صحف إبراهيم وموسى. أخبر أنه في تلك الكتب وأن الكتب الأولى فيه، فيصير بتلاوة هذا عليهم كأنه تلا تلك الكتب عليهم. So what they're saying is that often the Quran elsewhere makes reference to the Quran being an affirmation of the earlier revelations of Ibrahim, Moses, and Isa, and Jesus. And that when it says فيها كتب قيمة, the reference here is not to the literal Quranic translation, but the fact that the Quranic translation affirms other truthful revelation, the revelation of prior prophets from the time of Ibrahim till the time of Muhammad, which, as you know, if you're a true Muslim, you must believe in the revelation of Moses, you must believe in the revelation of Jesus. Even if you believe that some of the text has been altered, and that's a very big topic, but you still believe that, and that's why, as we will often see in the Quranic Tafsir, that often commentators of the Quran will quote the Torah and will quote the Injil, and when it agrees with the Quran, then then we believe it and we accept it as God's revelation. So when often the Torah will say Moses said, that's the part that we consider a revelation by Moses. When often you have one of the disciples said, and then Jesus said, and then you have a quote. That's the part that we will often believe. We disagree about Son of Man, Son of God issue, but that doesn't mean that all the text, as modern Muslims often do, they consider that none of this revelation is relevant, and that's a very novel corruption. That's not the way Islam dealt with these revelations in the past. In fact, all of the Quranic commentators, all of the Quranic scholars, one of the things that strikes you about them is that without exception, you immediately notice that all of them had read the Torah and the Injil, because they quote from it repeatedly and freely. Someone like Ibn Kathir doesn't, but someone like Al-Tabari, Qurtubi, Al-Razi, Al-Maturidi, Al-Tawhidi, they're always consistently quoting from both the Torah and the Injil. Okay, so then before we move on, كتب قيمة the word قيمة, we modern Arabs, when you use the word قيمة, they usually take it to mean something valuable. But that's not the way classical Arabic worked. قيمة comes from the word قيامة. A qiyamah is to fulfill the charge or to fill an obligation to it. So أنا قائم على الأمر or أنا قيم على ذلك means that you are in charge of and you fulfill your obligations towards something. So when you say كتب قيمة, it means صادقة, truthful books, or عادلة, credible and honest books, or the meaning that I agree the most was مستقيمة معتدلة, meaning carefully balanced and carefully measured, consistent with على ما تقتضيه الحكمة. مستقيمة معتدلة على ما تقتضيه الحكمة, carefully measured and carefully balanced, consistent with what wisdom would necessitate or what wisdom would call for. Now, does every word matter to this extent? Absolutely. Because if you simply say kutub qayyima and you say, oh, important books, let me move on. That's exactly why modern Muslims stopped learning from the Quran. But if you reflect on it and you see in this that an affirmation to the wisdom coming from earlier revelation, and an affirmation that revelation itself is consistent with wisdom and with knowledge, your entire attitude towards epistemology and knowledge changes. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I'm not being too advanced, am I? This is simple, right? Yeah. So I never know anything. Just making sure that and understanding how carefully measured Quranic expression is. You can't replace one word in the Quran and put another word in its stead, and for other reasons, by the way, because I told you before the Quranic revelation itself, it's like has a meter to it, and if you go around, the choice of words itself sustains that meter, which is quite fascinating. Okay. And by the way, so just before I forget, like when, for instance, the Quran, when the Quran said مصدقا لما معي ذكر هذا ذكر من معي وذكر من قبلي is a verse that I'm talking about, but the same meaning, that the Quranic revelation often refers to itself as an information to what came before me, and it's the same cottage to me. Okay, shall we pause here? Yeah. Someone, and you put him in this library and you say, okay, your job is to read all the books in this library. How long it would take them? And they didn't have to buy them.
Just read.
Just read. It's all civilizations in the world, what determines the rise and fall is whether the culture and social conditions can invest in the talents that Allah creates. So, the Bachs, the Mozarts, do they bury them or do they elevate them? And if the organization of society buries talent, the civilization is done, because it's these talents that ignite a sense of fervor and excitement and hope. And So you can always, you can study the health of a civilization by going to these elements that are talented in art, music, philosophy, mathematics, and see how they are treated within their context. And that will tell you everything you need to know. Okay, so, and Bayyinah. So next. Now, this is, what comes next is wonderful and beautiful. وَمَا تَفَرَّقَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ إِلَّا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَتْهُمُ الْبَيِّنَةُ. Okay, so literally, وَمَا تَفَرَّقَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ. Notice here, مَا تَفَرَّقَ, how does this is verse 4. How does it translate?
Yet those who were given the scripture became divided.
Okay, yeah. So tafarraq means to separate, to possibly divide, to separate something. Farq means a difference, a separation. So tafarraq means to divide, to separate. Notice here now, it no longer mentions the polytheists. It started out saying Ahl Kitab and the polytheists. And we said that it mentioned Ahl Kitab first and the polytheists second because within the historical context, the polytheist tribes, it's talking about the polytheistic tribes, the Mushrikeen tribes that considered the Ahl Kitab as authoritative. Then it drops the polytheists and addresses Ahl Kitab alone. But here is an important point. وَمَا تَفَرَّقَ is it meaning that they did not divide into groups, so they did not disagree amongst themselves until clear proof came to them? Well, if that's what it's talking about, it would give you pause. It would make you stop. Why? Because you would say, well, wait a minute. Well, we know that they were divided into groups before, if Bayyinah means the Quran or means the Prophet or means, even if it means innate wisdom, we know that they divided into groups before Islam and after Islam. So how could it be referring to them being divided into groups? So, in other words, if it's referring to sectarianism, that would give you pause. So, the majority of commentators would actually completely disagree with the majority of translations that you find in English. وَمَا تَفَرَّقَ, according to the overwhelming majority, is not referring to divisions. Meaning, وَمَا تَفَرَّقَ means they did not rebel, or they did not dissent from Muhammad's revelation until proof of the fact that he's the awaited Messiah come to them. That's actually the majority position. Interestingly, that's not what you find in the majority of translations. So in other words, they did not split, or they did not refuse to follow until it actually became clear to them that he is the awaited Messiah, but they refused to follow him. So if you put it in simple language, that would it be. The minority opinion said, well, yes, that is what it's saying, that when clear proof presented itself that this is the awaited Messiah, according to the signs for the awaited Messiah that we said the Arab Christians and the Arab Jews were known to. But also, it has, the minority opinion said, it's it's also referring to the fact that after human beings receive a truth, receive a clear message, which they recognize as a clear message. So in other words, they were saying that it's making another subtle point. And the subtle point is that after human beings receive a truthful message, because of their egos, they split up into sects and divisions. And in this context, a lot of the Ahl al-Hadith were fond of reciting or citing to a report attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, that Jews split into 70 groups, Christians split into 72 groups, and that Muslims will split into 73 groups, all of them in hellfire except one. So only one group, and then the report continues, well, which group is the one that's not going to go to hellfire? And the report, according to that report, the Prophet is supposed to respond, those who follow me and my companions. Now, this hadith, however, which Ahl al-Hadith are fond of citing to in the context of this particular verse, is problematic because historically Jews didn't split into 70 groups, and historically Christians didn't split into 72 groups. It's actually they split into more than that, if you count it. And whether Muslims split into 73 groups is problematic. So if you read Kitab al-Firaq by Shahrastani or Milal wal-Nihal, he counts more than 73. The other thing about this hadith is that it falls into the category of hadith that can be classified as anti-Shia. A lot of hadiths that refer to the right path as the path of the Prophet and his companions, without mentioning Ahl al-Bayt, which is Ja'far al-Sadiq and so on, are recognized as hadiths that were circulated to counter the claim of the family of the Prophet. So it mentions the Prophet and the companions, but not the family of the Prophet. And I am, in my school of thought, I reject these hadiths as politicized hadiths. Hadiths that played a part in sectarian politics, that are suspect. And when you study their chain transmission, in the vast majority of cases, I would even say in 90% of the cases, you find that your skepticism about the political role of the hadith is confirmed by the fact that they've been transmitted by people who were in fact sectarian in their own biographical history. So, although the Ahl al-Hadith minority view that saw this verse as referring to sectarianism, and it saw it as referring to sectarianism in order to project onto this verse a condemnation of sectarianism in Islam, and it wanted to condemn sectarianism in Islam specifically to condemn the Shia, that minority view is one, it's a minority view, but among contemporary translations of the Quran, it becomes the only view. That's the only view you find in Sunni translations of the Quran. Now, there is another tradition that is often cited, you find it in Shi'i Tafsir, in which which is the exact opposite of the Sunni sectarian tradition, in which the Prophet ﷺ is supposed to tell Ali, do you know who is the saved group? And Ali says, who, O Prophet of God? And he says, you and your Shia. That, again, is among those sectarian traditions that I am very suspicious of and do not But I do think the meaning of this verse is, the majority view is correct, even though among modern Muslims that view is not represented well. That what we're talking about is that the Ahl Kitab specifically, who knew the signs of the awaited Messiah, did not break, did not rebel, did not split, did not declare their opposition until they knew that this in fact was according to the affirmations they made before the revelation of Muhammad started, that this was in fact the person that they said they would follow. If only God would send to them an Arab prophet that fulfills the conditions. They wanted a prophet that walks in the street, that was the son of that was an orphan, that was from a noble family. There are a whole there's a whole thing about the conditions that they said that they were waiting for, and that were in fact according to their own criteria were fulfilled. Okay. وما تفرق الذين أوتوا الكتاب إلا من بعد ما جاءتهم البينة. So that then becomes clear enough as to what it's referring to. وما أمروا إلا ليعبدوا الله مخلصين له الدين حنفاء ويقيموا الصلاة ويؤتوا الزكاة وذلك دين القيمة. Okay, this one we have to pause with, because now this is an very important affirmation of what is a consistent theme in the Quran. The Quran often refers to ad-din al-hanif. Now, remember that the Prophet ﷺ himself says, بُعِثْتُ بِالْحَنَفِيَّةِ السَّمْحَاءِ. When the Prophet ﷺ describes Islam, he refers to it as Hanafiya, a tolerant Hanafiya, an open Hanafiya, a welcoming Hanafiya. Al-Hanafiya is a very old concept in Arabic philology, and it was known to pre-Islamic Arabs. Now, at the most basic level, it was known to be the faith of Ibrahim. The faith of Ibrahim was monotheism, a rejection of the Trinity, a rejection of the chosen people. The Arabs were quite conscious of the idea of the chosen people theology, which, although Islam came and it said, yes, in fact, they were chosen, but they were chosen not in the sense that they claimed they were chosen. So it's not a racial choosing, but a theological choosing. In other words, they agreed to follow Moses, so that those were the chosen people. Anyway, that's a different matter that we'll come to in a different surah. But the polytheism of Mecca split into two groups. A group that said, we still follow Ibrahim, but we need the Greco-Roman gods. The Greco-Roman gods were the Lat wal Uzza, Manat, and so on, that are interceders, because the God of Ibrahim is, they had gotten from the Jewish tradition that the God of Ibrahim is a tyrant, aloof, uninterested, and that the God of Ibrahim cannot be accessed unless you go to interceders, and the Allat wal Uzza and Manat were the interceders, the idols. The second group, which there's a big debate as whether Quraysh belonged to the second group or the first group, were outright atheists. They just didn't believe in God or the hereafter, so they completely rejected monotheism. Now, we often say the mushrikeen or the kuffar without differentiating which group, and that's what group we're referring to. that's okay in this context. In other contexts, we will find that we'll have to talk about it, but not now. What is important in this context is the concept of al-Hanafiyyah, which did refer to the monotheism of Ibrahim, the patriarch, the one who there was a widespread mythology that he is the father of the Kaaba in Mecca, although again a lot of corruptions and deviations have entered into it, and who is also known to Christianity and Judaism as the great patriarch, the great prophet. So, and there's another thing about al-Hanafiyyah is that it was a thoroughly moralistic theology. So the Hanifs were the closest they come to were the philosophers. It was the philosophy of the Stoics. They did not like the hedonism and materialism of Mecca and the Arabs and the classism and elitism of the Persians and their allies, or the classism and racism of the Romans. What is important is that Islam came affirming the Hanafiyyah as in fact the path of God. Now, if you look into the philosophical tradition, this created a certain affinity between many of the Muslim theologians and philosophers and what we know today as the Stoic tradition in Greek philosophy. The Stoics had a philosophy of self-empowerment and morality, and they were also most of the philosophers of the Stoics were put to death. I mean, if you study their history, but it was not necessarily Greek because it was more humanistic. It's often the Stoic philosophers, and the affirmation of Islam, of the Hanafiyyah, as in fact the morality of the Ibrahim, the Ibrahim of the Torah, who is often committing very tyrannical things and very cruel and brutal things, is denounced in the Quran as a corruption. And in fact, Ibrahim is constantly portrayed as sort of this coupling between monotheism and innate humanistic morality. And that is here where the word samha becomes important. When the Prophet ﷺ say al-Hanafiyya samha, as-samih is not just someone who is tolerant. Tolerant is a poor translation for it. As-samih is someone who's pleasant, who brings happiness to others. So when you say rajulun samih, means a man who is friendly, pleasant, happy. So a good translation for samha is humanistic. So so in other words, elsewhere, Muslim theologians often refer to al-Hanafiyyah as Siratul I'tidal, the path of moderation. You are neither fanatic literalists like the Qurra, nor hedonists like Ahl al-Hawa. So you follow a path of moderation. So when it comes there, it says, وَمَا أُمِرُوا, and they were not commanded. So it's who's the they that they're referring to? It's referring to وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهِ. They were not commanded except to worship God. It's referring to the people of the book. And what the original message was. So what is the original message that the Quran, and this is a repeated theme in the Quran, where it's basically consistently bringing back the origins of the true methods. The origin, they were not commanded except to worship God, Ya'budullah, mukhlisina lahu din. How does he translate the first verse?
Though all they were ordered to do was worship God alone, sincerely devoting their religion to Him as people of true faith, keep up the prayer and pay the prescribed alms, for that is the true religion.
Yeah, mukhlisina lahu din. It's interesting that he skips the Hunafa part. In the translation by the Sayyid Nasr group, what is it called?
The study Quran.
Huh?
Some of the study Quran.
Yeah, the study Quran.
Which you have. Right?
He just has the Arabic word Hunafa. He doesn't translate it.
Hanifs.
Hanifs, right? Yeah. Singular form, in other words. So, which is entirely respectable. So, مخلصين له الدين ويقيم الصلاة, establish prayer, ويؤتوا الزكاة, and give alms or donate. ذلك دين القيم. Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit. So, here, when it comes to ibadah, and I just want to, if I can find it again. I didn't have time to index my notes, so that's why I just, there was too much to do. Yeah. This is from Razi's Tafsir. He says, والعبادة هي التذلل ومنه طريق معبد أي مذلل ومن زعم أنها الطاعة فقد أخطأ. Why am I quoting this? Because modern Muslims always, when it comes to the word Ya'budullah or Ibadah, they always translate it as obey God. What Al-Razi is saying is, Ibadah comes from the same root as Tariq al-Mu'abbad. Tariq al-Mu'abbad is a straightened out path or a flat, a set out road. Ibadah means at-tazallul, not humiliation, because modern Muslims understand tazallul from the word dhul, which means to lower yourself to something. Tazallul means to make yourself at ease with something, to make your inner self consistent. It's as if you are moderating yourself, so you balance your ego so that you are consistent with the divine. And Al-Razi says, and those who said that ibadah means obedience are just simply wrong. This is the Arabic that I was quoting. Because, again, modern Muslims, under the influence of modern theological movements, often just think that that's what ibadah is, just obedience to God. That's not correct, and that's flattening of a very, very nuanced concept and a very rich concept. Okay, so they were ordered to perform ibadah to Allah. Now, mukhlisina lahu din, why does Allah say mukhlisina lahu din hunafa? Okay, the Hanif's part, we said it's an affirmation of al-Hanafiyya samha, which is affirmed repeatedly in the Quran as the path of Ibrahim and all the prophets, and an insistence that the morality of the Hanafiyya is the morality of the prophets. Mukhlisina lahu din, the issue of the sincerity of your inside. I wanted to see if I want to quote this or not. Just one second. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. What I was looking for, and I found the quote, a very fascinating discussion that, especially among the Usuli commentators and the Sufi commentators, even more than the Usulis, but not among the Ahl al-Hadith commentators. Which it always fascinates me that they always pause at this issue of mukhlisin. Ikhlas means to be sincere in something. Here's a theological question, and I'm sure it will surprise modern Muslims. If you worship Allah because you want the joys of heaven, you want fruit, and you want trees, and you want rivers, does that impeach your sincerity? Are you worshiping Allah because you want the heaven or because you want Allah? So here's the quote. Because I know modern Muslims, they say, oh, no, you must be making it up. You know. So here's the quote. الإخلاص من الابتداء الفعل إلى الانتهاء والمخلص هو الذي يأتي بالحسن لحسنه والواجب لوجوبه ويأتي بالفعل لوجهه مخلصا لربه بل قالوا لا يجعل طلب الجنة مقصودا ولا النجاة عن النار مطلوبا. So, a true ikhlas would mean that you would seek the beauty of Allah for its beauty. Indeed, when they say وَقَالُوا, in this case he's referring to Usulis, but in the other tafsir, the Sufis are referring to Sufis. But they even say that, in fact, that you don't even do so because you want Jannah or because you want to avoid hellfire. Because if you do so because what you want is Jannah, then your ikhlas, your sincerity is to Jannah, not to Allah. And if you do it because you feel hellfire, you fear hellfire, then your ikhlas is to yourself and avoiding being hurt, not because you want Allah. So, Mukhlisina Luddin sparked a long discussion about how about those who covet Jannah or who fear hell, are they Mukhlisina Lahuddin? And for modern Muslims, I'm sure you were all raised that the reason you obey Allah is because you want Jannah and you avoid hellfire. But that's not ikhlas. That's either you're egotistical, self-centered, or basically you want to save your own hide. But that is mukhlis li nafsak, mukhlis li khayrak, mukhlis li naf'ak, in other words, you are loyal to what you want, the good that you want for yourself or the harm you want to avoid. So and here the word Hunafa then underscores the importance, because the Hunafa, the Hanifs, part of the bragging rights of the Hunafa, the Hanifs of Arabia, was that they were the first to invent the whole poetry of virginal love for Allah, to talk about Allah. If you're a woman, you talk about Allah as your the man that you love, and or if you're a man, you talk about the divine love as a love of a woman. So the entire Sufi poetry about Layla, when they often talk about Layla is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for the divine. So when you often find, even modern Arabs, they'll say Ya Layli Ya Aini, Ya Layli Ya Aini in songs. And, idiots say, well, what the heck why do they keep saying Ya Layli Ya Aini? Are they talking about my night, my eye, my night, my eye? No, that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about God. Of course, modern Arabs have forgotten that a long time ago. No modern singer says Ya Layli Ya Aini and thinks about God. But that's where it comes from. Ya Layli Ya Aini was a metaphor for God. The eye, the seeing eye, remember the eye that we talked about that you put in sujood? That's the eye that they're referring to. And Ya Layli Layla is symbolically what all the Sufis connoted with. So, for instance, when Halaqa, you seek the love of Layla, and Layla is nothing but you. What Halaqa is saying that that search inside yourself for the divine. Anyway, so that's the importance of مخلصين له الدين حنفاء ويقيموا الصلاة ويؤتوا الزكاة. Now, here comes the other part, is that one of the biggest points of contention between that Muslim theologians insisted on is that unless your belief is affirmed by action, your belief is cheap and worthless. Because it's easy for anyone to say, I believe. But the hardest two things are salah, to actually stand in prayer, because it requires that you invest time regularly. And human beings are cheap about their time. They like to direct their time towards themselves, not give it. And the second biggest challenge, money. Now here's zakah, and here all the commentators note something very interesting. The revelation of this verse that says, وَيُقِيمُ الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُوا الزَّكَاةَ, was revealed before the portion of zakah, the zakah that we know today in law, whatever dara alayha al-hawl, whatever you have for a year is 2.5%. Well, the reference to zakah here was before we even knew what the law of zakah. So what was zakah referring to? It's giving. So zakah here is nearly identical to sadaqah, meaning the reason it's called zakah is because it purifies the giving of material things, purifies your soul and your wealth. Unless you are willing to part with the physical and spatial commitment of salah and the material commitment of giving to the needy. So that is why for the well, actually, when we get to Khayr al-Bariyah, and that is why then it concludes وَذَلِكَ دِينُ قَيِّمَةً. So, and this is the true qayyimah here means the true religion, and that is qayyimah. It literally means something that is valuable. Deen al-qayyimah. Now there is a mini debate about whether Deen al-qayyimah means. Why did it say وَذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمُ? Because elsewhere in the Quran, when it describes the true religion, it says al-din al-qayyim, masculine. But here it says al-din, dinu, not al-din, dinu al-qayyimah, feminine. So some commentators said that then cannot be, a qayyimah cannot be referring to al-din, but referring to the followers of the faith. So in other words, that it's referring to deen ahl al-qayyimah, wa ahl is mahzuf. For us the difference is not material, but for them it's whether it's referring to this is the true followers or the truthful faith. Maybe hair splitting, things that people like me get excited about. Okay, so إن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين في نار جهنم خالدين فيها أولئك هم شر البرية إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات أولئك هم خير البرية. Where's Amanda? I lost my translator. Oh, okay, another translator fill in.
I have the Muhammad Asad one. Or do you want to go?
Go ahead.
That's better.
Verily those who despite all evidence are bent on denying the truth, be they from among the followers of earlier revelation or from among those who ascribe divinity to aught beside God, will find themselves in the fire of hell, therein to abide. They are the worst of all creatures.
Yeah, then the one that follows that.
And
Number
verily,
7.
and verily, those who have attained to faith and do righteous deeds, it is they who are the best of all creatures.
Okay. So, إن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين. So here it goes back to أهل الكتاب والمشركين. We started لم يكن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين. So it goes back to, because it started out by saying the people of the book and the polytheists. And then it addressed the people of the book alone. Then it went back to the people of the book and the polytheists. And the same, we have the same, what did I do with my glasses?
Here. Drop.
Oh. Then we get the same issue, is it, when it says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, is it referring to to people of the book and the polytheists from in the past to the future, or is it specifically referring to the people of the book and the polytheists who denied the signs of the prophet, who refused to follow him, i.e. limited to the Ahl Kitab, the people of the book in Arabia of the time, and the polytheists of Arabia of the time? That's a debate. So some say no. This is a reference to what the verse started with, meaning that it is not the polytheists and people of the book in the absolute, while others say no. Here it shifted gears to addressing the people of the book and the polytheists, not limited to the historical contingency. So in other words, it first started out with the polytheists and the people of the book and the polytheists who denied the signs of Muhammad's prophecy, but now it's talking about those in a more absolute terms. However, I'll read this in Arabic again because I've seen Muhammad Asad actually translates it really well. And a lot of the other modern translations, you should see how the Saudi translation translates this. So here's this is a Matridi who reflects what you'll find in this is from the group that said no, it's not limited to the historical context, so it's more general. So it says ظاهره أن يكون التأويل أن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين أي بعض المشركين في النار لا كل المشركين ولكن من كفر من المشركين كان كمن كفر من أهل الكتاب. So basically you're saying, well, here the reference, it's not to all the people of the book, because elsewhere in the Quran it says those of the people of the book who do good and so on, they have the reward is with Allah, and not all the polytheists, but a group among the people of the book and a group among the polytheists. Now, when it comes to Sharr al-Bariyah, the worst of humankind, paralleled with إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات أولئك هم خير البرية. That those who believe and do good are the best of humankind. This gave commentators a pause. Why? Because if you are saying, I always feel compelled to read from the original text because I always feel that modern Muslims just simply don't believe you. They think you're making stuff up unless you actually quote to them medieval texts. Maybe I'm too jaded, just having been around Muslims all my life.
I've only been around Muslims half my life. I'm already jaded.
Where is it? No, it's not this one. So the issue that they're struggling with is, if you describe even some of Ahl Kitab and some of the polytheists as the worst of Sharr al-Bariyah. So then you say, but we know that to designate a category as the worst, it implies a hierarchy, better and worse. So it would logically, and these people thought, they used their brains. They didn't just. So they said, well, logically, if you were going to say that they're those who disbelieve from, some of those who disbelieve from people of the book and the polytheists are the worst of kind, it implies that there are some who are better and some who are worse. So why are they the worst? How would that make sense? And then, while we can understand if you say those who believe and do good are the best of humankind, so you're saying all of them are the best of what God has, at least among what God has created. The first verse, among those who, the gradations between disbelievers, gives you pause. The verse, the quote that I'm looking for is a nice quote where he says, we know that there are people like Abu Lahab, and there are people, he gives several examples of historical characters and says they can't be all the same, because some of them are really horrible and some of them are not that horrible. So how could they all be described as the worst of Sharr al-Bariyah? Which in your translation, Amanda, how does it translate?
Ayah 6? Or
I think it's 7.
Yes.
Shariah and American 6.
6. Those who disbelieve among the people of the book and idolaters will have the fire of hell there to remain. They are the worst of people.
It's the worst of people.
They are the worst of
So it goes back to that same issue. Now, in this point, you get the other than the literal Ahl al-Hadith people, they launch into a long discussion as to how grammatically this verse invites you to think in terms of gradations of evil. So while it tells you that there are among Ahl Kitab and among the polytheists are those who are worse of humankind, it doesn't tell you who precisely among them is worse. But the quote that I don't want to spend time looking for it, but it's in one of the other books that I brought. I don't know if it pops up, I'll read it. Basically, a quote that says that kufr in itself is insufficient to make anyone the worst of humankind.
Or shirk.
Or shirk, for that matter. Because, well, among the mushrikeen, so we already have the polytheists. But that, it was,
It's a moral category? No.
if it comes even if out of order, I'll flip to it when I get the chance, and I'll read it just for so that okay. But what I wanna okay. I want to get to جزاؤهم عند ربهم جنات عدن تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها أبدا رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه وذلك لمن خشي ربه. Madi, can you read the last verse?
The last verse?
Yeah.
Their reward with their Lord is everlasting gardens graced with flowing streams, where they will stay forever. God is well pleased with them, and they with him. All this is for those who stand in awe of their Lord.
Now, what? First, so when it says their reward and ربهم جنات عدن تجري من تحتها الأنهار, it's referring to خير البرية. There is an those who said that these are historically contingent verses said that the reason it says خير البرية, it is referring to الرعيل الأول, meaning it's referring to the first generation, i.e. the Prophet and those who followed the Prophet, not to the later generations of Muslims. That's not the school of thought I follow, but you should know that there is a school of thought that says that the reason it says that describes those who believe and do good as being the best of humankind is because it's referring to the best of humankind being the followers of the Prophet at the time of the Prophet. So that's a historically contingent school. Those who said no, it's referring to, in absolute terms, that those who truly believe, مخلصين له الدين, those who sincerely believe, following God, and that what the key to the entire thing is رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه, that Allah is pleased with them and they are pleased with God. That here al-Rida, particularly the Sufis and to a lesser extent the Usulis, say الرضا ما بعد الحب وما بعد الوصال والحب والعشق. That to truly رضا means to be in a state not of being accepting something. Today in modern Arabs, let's say ترضى means do you accept? That's modern Arabic. But al-rida is not simply accept, but to be in a state of complete inner peace with something. So how did we get from poetical pre-modern Arabic to modern Arabic? It's because of the corruptions of law. Law co-opted the word rida to the technical term, meaning acceptance in a contractual sense. So, hab radit, do you accept the contract, radit? And then law said that as long as a rada is expressed verbally, it doesn't matter what your inner self is. But so that's how the transformation happened. But rida among the theologians leave alone the philosophers. But among the theologians, and particularly Sufi theologians and lesser extent Usulis, they said it is when your inner and outer are in complete state of repose. So your hawa, your longings, your desires are completely consistent with what you are accepting or what you are at peace with. So when Allah said, when here it says that Allah radiyallahu anhum wa radu anhu, that they and the divine are in a complete state of peace and repose. So who is it referring to? It's referring to mukhlisina lahu din, those who worship Allah sincerely, not because they want heaven or hell, but that because they want Allah for Allah. Now, so then the Sufis often say, so why does Allah says, Jannatu adn tajri min tahtiha al-anhar? The Usulis respond to this by saying it's because Allah is generous, Kareem, Muhsin. That even if you love Allah, for Allah, Allah will still say, I want to give you my na'am. I still want to give you my bounties. I will still give you heaven even if you don't want it. Sufis, however, disagreed. And let me... No, don't tell me I didn't. Did I drop a book?
There's one more book over there, maybe that.
Oh, no, I did. Okay. I was going to have a heart attack if I didn't bring my Sufi example. Okay, so here's how the Sufis, and again I'll quote because Tajri min tahtiha al-anhar. And see how he and again, my apologies to those who don't know Arabic, I'll translate. أي جداول المعارف والحقائق المتجددة المرشحة من بحر الحقيقة. So, because among Sufis, they insist Jannah, and when it says rivers flowing from underneath, that it's not referring to water, and it's not referring to rivers in the way we know it today. تجري من تحتها الأنهار means جداول المعارف والحقائق, means the flow of truth, the rivers of truth and true enlightenment. Because for the Sufis, the Jannah is not physical, is not material. Jinan is a state of unity with the divine, where the material is silly. So now, when I say the lesser extent, the Usulis, is because the Usulis say, well, there is no problem if God wants to give you physical things, and you say, no, God, I don't want the physical, I just want to stay in your company. But you have the offer. So it's sort of like a concession in between. What the Sufis, which particularly, because of radiyallahu anhum wa radu an, this expression became a theological mantra for Sufis. And they insist that rida is a step beyond love and beyond ishq is love, but like adoring love, passionate love. That it's the state where you and your beloved become as if one. There is no longer the lover and the beloved. So, put separately, put differently. If this is the example they always say, if you say I love this person, as long as there is the you and the he or the she, what you are saying is, I am maintaining the difference, the separation between us, and then I am loving that difference. But the difference is still there. But to reach a state of complete rida, your will and the will of the beloved is one and the same. And to them, this expression, I can't underscore enough how important it became in the Sufi imagination. In the Usuli imagination, it was, they accepted that you cannot truly be, to say رضيت عن الله sounds odd if it really means that you accept God, but you must be in peace with God. But they didn't spend a lot of time reflecting upon the difference between rida and love. Well, the Sufis did, and that's why they tied it back to Mukhlisina Lahuddin, and they tied it back to Khair al-Bariyah. That Khair al-Bariyah, best of humankind, are those who elevate their state of love to beyond the desire for the material or the fear of the material. Either desire for reward or fear of punishment. Okay, let me check if I'm forgetting anything. Because
It's 7:34.
Oh,
I want
okay.
to make sure we have time for Q&A.
So let me just do just make sure that I'm not forgetting anything that I will remember late at night and then hate myself for it. I just want to make sure I've covered all the major headlines. There is a hadith to the. I'll close with this. There's hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. It's not very famous in the modern age, which is often quoted in the context of commenting on this particular surah. من كان في عمل الله كان الله في عمله. Whoever is dedicated or committed to Allah, Allah is committed or dedicated to him or her. Which it surprises me often that among modern Muslims, I never hear this hadith quoted. While it was among the texts of pre-modern Islam, you would often see it quoted. So I had made a note to myself to, where's my notebook? Oh. I had made a note to myself to make sure that you guys know about this hadith, which is often quoted in this context, because we don't hear it in the modern age that often. That's it. We did it.
Yeah, can you repeat?
I always say that every time. Huh?
Could you repeat the hadith?
Oh, من كان في عمل الله كان الله في عمله. That you want me to English or
English and then related to what verse?
Oh, the hadith is always quoted in the context of the entire surah.
Oh.
And the hadith basically means whoever is dedicated or committed to Allah, Allah is dedicated or committed to him or her.
Thank you.
Can you repeat it slowly?
من كان في عمل الله كان الله في عمله.
Narrated by who?
I don't remember.
من كان في أمل الله and
كان الله في عون. It's been narrated على أوجه مختلفة, but I don't remember. I know that it had, among them is Abu Huraira, but I mean Al-Maturidi quotes it without a narration, but it's a hadith that's commonly quoted. So I've seen it with the full isnad in many times. It's just I don't know. There are in the mechanics of modern Islam, there's certain hadiths that because they were not adopted by modern Salafis, and as you know, it's the Salafis that have had the predominant impact on modern Islam. They're just simply forgotten and for no good reason. Because I mean, you could translate the hadith in ways that would be very consistent with Salafi theology. So, for instance, you could say, whoever is obedient to Allah, Allah will be giving towards him. And that would be consistent with Salafi theology. So why did it drop from the literature? Who knows?